Hey there, it's Mark with Mark's Astro Journey. So I had an interesting experience here traveling to Nevada, and I'm from Indiana, and just wanted to share my experience just getting here. I'm doing an imaging session in this video of the Lost Jewel of Orion, or NGC 1980. I think it's also called the lower sword, or the lower part of Orion's sword. But along the way here, as I go through the imaging session, I thought I'd share with you some of the crazy stuff that happened just in the first few days trying to drive here from between Indiana and Nevada, and then even once we got here to Nevada. So it's been quite an experience, and I hope you enjoy not only the imaging session, but hearing about some of the craziness we went through and the struggles just trying to get out here. So let's get started with the imaging session. Here's a quick look at my rig and the environment I'm working in here at the campground. I didn't get to go out to any dark site, so this is just a quick look right before dark. So here in Stellarium, I'm going to slew to the Lost Jewel of Orion, or NGC 1980. So about the trip, the day before we left, we discovered we had a busted water heater in our RV. And so I had winterized the camper. I followed the instructions in the manual. And this camper has this panel that tells you how to set a bunch of levers. It's like color coded. So I did all of that exactly as it said. But when I started to get the camper ready, I discovered the water heater had busted. So that was the very first obstacle we faced to trying to leave. I'll do a plate solve and resync to get our mount lined up on the target. So really our only option was the very next day, the day we're supposed to leave and drive 7 or 8 hours to get to our first place. Go to the dealer, see if they had see if they had one of these tankless water heaters in stock, and see if they could repair it that day, even though it wasn't scheduled. And then also find out the really bad news about what it was going to cost, because RV dealers are not cheap. Their laborers, I think, probably higher than a normal mechanic, I guess because it's specialized. And the parts, like a water heater, are not cheap. So we went that next day, and guess what we found out? They had one tankless water heater in stock. They were willing to work on it. It would take several hours, and it was going to cost us like $1,300. So the tankless water heater was like $700 or $800, and the labor was the rest of it. So we're kind of in a bind, and there was no way to do the repair yourself at that point in time and try to leave on a trip. So that very first day of our trip, when we were supposed to drive 7 or 8 hours, we spent the first 4 or 5 hours waiting to get our RV repaired at the dealer. And so we didn't get started until sometime around lunch or after lunch. We got there as early as we could. So that was day number 1, and a really tough hit economically too, to have to pay for that repair. So I've connected the equipment and started the guiding, so we'll give that some time to see how that's going to go. So the first day of our trip, our destination was Springfield, Missouri. We got there pretty late because of the delay, so we're getting there beyond when they normally would check somebody into the campground, and it's, obviously dark. The good thing is it was a pull-through site, and the camper's like 37 feet long plus the truck, so pretty long rig to back into a site in the dark in a place you've never been, so I was happy for that. But it was a long, hard day, and we were pretty tired. So that's how the first day of travel went. That was actually pretty uneventful after we had our first hiccup. So I'm going to speed up this guiding capture, the beginning of it, and also the capture over in SharpCap, so we can see how the histogram looks and how the guiding's looking as we get things set up to start our imaging session. So day 2, our destination was Amarillo, Texas. We were trying to split this drive up into like 6 to 8 hour days. So the guiding's looking halfway reasonable, and we can see I've got the histogram looking a little better, so I'm going to get a capture started on the Lost Jewel of Orion. I'm going to go with 60-second exposures and gain of 273 in the full capture area the camera supports. So as we're driving into Texas, approaching Amarillo, we started to get into this snow and it was blowing sideways. And this really started to make me worry a little bit. We chose this southern, what we thought was the southern route between Indiana and Nevada, because there's another way you can go farther north. So we thought if we went the southern route, it's more likely to be warm, less likely to have problems with weather. But here we were in Amarillo, Texas, driving into snow. So that's the way that day went, driving to Amarillo, but the next morning was quite an experience. So the next morning, it was going to be so cold that during the travel that we would have to winterize the camper because it'd be going down the road. It was going to be below freezing, and I'd already went through having a repair on something busting with the plumbing. I didn't want to risk that. So I went out and got some of the antifreeze you use to winterize a potable drinking system like in a camper or boat or whatever. The pump would not pull it in. So I'm out in the like crazy wind and cold. It was like freezing cold. I had gloves on, my hands were still cold, and the pump would not draw the antifreeze in. And I was thinking, what else can go wrong on this trip? So anyways, it turns out you have to hold the antifreeze higher than the pump. So you're holding this bottle of antifreeze, a gallon of antifreeze, way up in the air, trying to get it higher than the pump so that it'll start to prime to draw in the antifreeze. So we'll start off our imaging session, and we'll also switch back over to the guiding and take a look to see how our guiding's going before we leave it, because we'll have to come back and check in on it after a little while to make sure everything's still on track and everything's going well. So we winterized the plumbing and we were off to Holbrook, Arizona as our next destination. About 37 minutes into the imaging session, I'm just doing a check-in to make sure that the guiding still looks like it's on track, and also in sharp cap things still are looking good. It's looking good right now. So here it's a little over 52 minutes into the imaging session and things are still looking good. The travel from Amarillo, Texas to Holbrook, Arizona would be the most difficult travel day, without a doubt. Just a few hours into the drive, the snow and the wind picked up. Now just checking in again about an hour and 15 minutes into the imaging session, and here on the guiding, noticing that things are going pretty good until this started, so it looks like we're getting either some snag or backlash or wind. There's a lot of wind here. So on the leg to Holbrook, the snow started accumulating. The GPS tells us it's changing the route and tells us to take an exit. And so we take this exit, and you would not believe it took us into like a country road, like a mountain road, a 2-lane highway, and no snow treatment had been done. And there were like 4 inches or more of snow on the road up in this hill. So I'm up here with this dually truck. It's long, 37-foot camper, nowhere to turn around in horrible road conditions. The only options to turn around were these little short pull-offs. It's not really a true road. They go off like into a farm field and there's a gate across. So that was my only option. So I turned around in one of those and amazingly got the camper turned around. So just checking in here about an hour and a half in. Guiding's looking a little better. Still a little windy out here, so things seem to be on track. So we go back down in the little town we stopped at to reroute, and a UPS man inside a restaurant tells my wife, you might as well get off the road, park it, get a hotel. You're not going anywhere for hours because there's all kinds of wrecks up ahead on the interstate. Our light frames have been captured, so time to capture our darks. I'm going to go with 20 dark frames. So back to our trip, we decided to wait it out in a parking lot for an hour or two. Then we got back on the highway, and on the interstate, we only went a little ways and the road was just stopped. And then finally, police started directing everybody to take an exit, and you had to take like it was like a 30-mile detour going south and then back north to go around some wrecks on the interstate. Once we got back to the interstate, we realized what that UPS driver was talking about. There were trucks and cars off both sides of the road in the median, and all kinds of wreckers pulling vehicles out or hooking them up because they were wrecked. So it truly was a horrible traffic situation, and it took us till very late that evening. I think we were driving until after 10 o'clock that evening, so it was a full day of driving in slow traffic on interstates with weather problems. But we finally made it to Holbrook. So here we can see that our dark frames are getting close to wrapping up here, and once we get the dark frames completed, we'll get started with our flat frame capture. So the next day of our travel was from Holbrook, Arizona to Boulder City, Nevada. Now that I have my dark frames captured, it's time to capture the flat frames. And as usual, you have to adjust the exposure and the gain to get the histogram looking right for flat frames. What I'm shooting for, is to get the histogram to be concentrated about a third of the way from the left hand side, and that usually seems to work pretty well. And what I plan on doing is once I get this histogram looking about right, I'm going to capture about 200 flat frames. So back to the fourth day of our trip from Indiana to Nevada, going from Holbrook to Boulder City, Nevada. It really was a great day. The weather warmed up, it was sunny, and we didn't face any problems on the road we drove on. However, the GPS came up and said rerouting, and it was going to take us like a 30-mile detour. And it said there was a severe fire near the interstate. Well, it was a little bit of a gamble, but we said we're not going to do it. We're not taking another route. We're just going to go up here and see what we encounter. What it turned out to be is a semi-truck on the side of the road, on the other side of the road, had truly burned to a crisp. And they had traffic slowed down on the other side of the road. But it was not blocking the road or anything, and we were able to continue. And we made it all the way to Boulder City without any issues. And that was a great relief to have one day of travel without issues. So here in Astropixel Processor, I'm going to select the light frames that I captured, the flats, the bias, and the dark frames. And I always like to sort by quality, so I choose that before I kick off the analyze. And so this analyze is going to do the calibration and analysis of the frames to, evaluate their quality. Then we'll be able to see the results of that. So I'll speed this up quite a bit, and that way you can still see what the calibrate and analyze steps do. So once we finally got to Nevada, the last thing that I wanted to mention is we came here thinking that this time of year that the weather would be much different from Indiana. So we're thinking, 50s, maybe 60s, and pretty decent weather. As it turns out, we've had a few days like that, but actually Indiana has had weather in the 70s and up to, I think, almost 80 several days. And here we've had cold, very windy weather on a lot of days. So the weather turned out to be, I guess it's just not normal weather. We just so happened to visit here when they got a spell of really rare weather. And there was one day where the wind was blowing, and when you look down into the valley here around Boulder City and Vegas, all you could see was dust. It was just looked like a valley of dust. So had some pretty strong winds. I think they said it was gusting up to like 60 miles an hour or so. So an interesting experience with the weather in Nevada. So now that the analyze step is completed, I usually try to sort the quality of those frames and then go back and review the frames. And I mentioned this on some of my other videos. Even though the software can rate them with a percentage rating for quality, if it's not a huge number of frames, I like to go through and look at them, because sometimes the wind will blow and you'll have like double images on the stars or something like that. Or, there could even be a cable snag. You never know, like reasons that you could have frames aren't really that great. And sometimes the quality rated by the software still is pretty high. So it's good to find those and eliminate them. So that's what I'm doing in this step. And then I'll kick off the integrate so that we can produce the stacked image using all the various frames. So this is the satisfying part. We can see the stacked image in Astropixel processor. And now I like to make some adjustments to a few things in here like black point and saturation, gamma correction, just a few minor adjustments. And then I'll take this, the TIFF that I save out of here over into GIMP and do additional adjustments to try to bring out as much as we can from the data captured. And I usually try to save to like a TIFF file and also a JPEG so that I have at least 2 files, from the work I did in Astropixel processor in case something happens to one. So here's a quick look at the image after processing in Astropixel processor. So now we'll open this in GIMP and adjust some things like saturation, black level, also the exposure, and then the brightness and contrast. And sometimes the chroma makes a difference too. And a lot of times you have to take these adjustments back and forth to try to get the best acuity you can on the image. And then I always save these as several formats, usually TIFF, PNG, JPEG, files like that, and name them with something like GIMP in the name. That way you can distinguish which part of the process produced this image. So here's a look at the image after processing in GIMP. So here's a look at the image after processing in the 2 software applications. I think it turned out pretty good. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. It's helpful to help grow the channel. You could do that. If you enjoyed this video, check out another video I did imaging the Flame Nebula.